Ready up? Okay, are we ready to go?
Continue.
Hi, Dave. Yes,
Oh.
we have enough people for a quorum. We can start the meeting whenever you're ready.
Okay, we're ready to call this meeting to order. We have a quorum, so Emily, if you want to take over.
All right, so the first thing on the agenda is the hearing of the public. Do we have any public who would like to speak?
Yes, if that's possible. My name is
Yes.
Michael Furman. Is that okay? Good. My name is Michael Furman, and I am the new executive director of All Aboard Erie, which is an educational advocacy organization established in 2009 to promote intercity and Erie County mobility access, whether it's bus, taxi, Lyft, any of the forms of mobility, but more specifically, rail. And I want to first take a moment to thank both Honey Stemka and Emily for inviting me. My goal here is to just observe how the MPO runs and hopefully develop in the long run a strategic partnership for a new initiative that All Aboard Erie has embarked on. I became the executive director primarily because All Aboard Erie was asked to participate, in fact, take the lead role in developing a new strategic rail alliance between Chicago and New York City. Erie is, as we all know, strategically located between these two major cultural and economic hubs. Organizations along this corridor, called the Lakeshore Corridor, has asked Erie if they would be the lead partner to develop a platform from which all of these organizations can basically identify short-term and long-term goals to speak to Congress with the objective to create more rail frequency along this corridor. So it's really quite an honor to be asked to do that, and that is our goal here. As we know, rail is an important function of intercity mobility for our region. And currently there is one rail train that runs out of Erie along the corridor to Chicago, which leaves at 1:54 in the morning. And the other going eastbound leaves at 7:24 New York. We believe that pushing Amtrak, especially under the recent grant or funding that the Biden administration put forward, we would like to see Amtrak do a couple of those things. Number one is add 4 lines across, or 4 trains along this corridor. The demand we anticipate is already there. We'd like to see Amtrak obviously create better train sets that are either equal or better than your experience riding a train. And ultimately, long-term vision would be to start connecting these corridors through high-speed rail. As we know, transportation in America is the #1 greenhouse gas emission emitter. Rail, especially if it was moved off of diesel to electric, would basically abate that concern, thus playing a significant role in reducing greenhouse gases. We think that the time now is upon us, that we need to address transportation and mobility, not just along this corridor, but in America, especially from a country that was the leading industry in the 19th century in building railroads. So my time here today is basically to observe how the MPO works. We have been recommended to participate in this both from the Federal Highway or Federal Rail Association, as well as other agencies, to develop strategic partners with the MPO so that if opportunities come where Erie can be a beneficiary of either developing more rails through Union Station or indeed developing the properties around the railroad industry or the Union Station, that we want to be there with a plan in place so that when money starts to be brought down from the federal government that Erie and Erie County is prepared with some form of an agenda and plan so that we can take advantage of this. So I want to thank you for your time. And I look forward to learning from all of you on how to possibly develop a strategic partnership for Erie County's benefit. Thank you. I can take any questions if you'd like.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. We appreciate you being here. You're a part of a very important transportation entity. We do need to push this forward to have better train access. And I would say that we would welcome you to be with us. You can talk to Emily about the structure. And thank you for coming on board this morning.
David, I'd just like to one more addition, and then I'll be quiet for the rest of the meeting, obviously. By developing relationships with partners along in railroad, we also include freight as a major strategic partnership, so that what we're trying to do is establish opportunities for both passenger rail and freight, which moves 40% of the commodities in America, can actually be a win-win situation. So that I know that plays a big role in Corey, for example. So this isn't about getting cars off the road. It's adding another opportunity for people and freight to move goods and people. So thanks.
Very good. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Have you considered, or has anybody considered maybe using like a monorail system that would utilize the interstate medians to run down through, and then also connecting into Pittsburgh? And this could be all hubbed out of the airport area, that people could travel fairly easily from Chicago to New York and down to Pittsburgh and vice versa.
Well, Fred, I don't claim to be a rail scholar in any means. I'm more of a civic development person, and that's the reason why I was brought on board. Having said that, you probably know this, for the past 40 years, there have been serious attempts to connect Erie and Pittsburgh, whether it's through Maglev, which is the compressed battery systems that can move people between Erie and Pittsburgh in a half hour. One of the things that I did learn is that number one, building separate lines, a monorail, as you're saying, or even a high-speed rail, which requires a straight line, is exceedingly expensive. The upload cost of capital is just enormous. If you just point to California, for example, and this is the very first high-speed rail joint effort between private and public partnership, it's running over big time. So it's very expensive on the front end. The long run, of course, it pays rich dividends. So the topography issue with the building of the railroads initially were not straight lines, which then kind of hamper in a little bit the ability to move quickly. So to have a dedicated line along that meridian is certainly something that there have been planning projects on that. Whether or not they want to build new this is what I'm hearing, Fred, is that they want to really work with Amtrak and freight to develop or to exploit the existing rail lines that are there, that are being unused by freight, which I think is much more economical. And if we can get that, I think we might be in a better position. But to answer your question, yes, they've looked at that. And that's certainly one of the things that we're trying to work with. As we speak today, there is and Amtrak did this. They're looking at trying to develop a rail line that comes off of Cleveland, shooting down to Pittsburgh, over to Harrisburg, and into Philadelphia. And Erie, by the way, was not on that project list. So what we want to do with regards to Erie, we want to make sure that we are on that corridor, whether it comes through Cleveland, Erie, and down Pittsburgh, or shooting back up to Buffalo and over into New York City. So it's a moving target right now, but I think forming together and having Erie as the lead agency will ensure that we're going to be part of the conversation as we move forward.
After traveling, I've traveled on rail, clean out west, and the situation is that Amtrak has to give way to the freight trains. The Amtrak has no jurisdiction to use the rail. It's all freight has the major, they're the ones that control it, and rightfully so. But it does my thinking is that the investment in like a monorail that would run out of Erie as a hub, that would run from Chicago to New York and then also down to, it would open up Erie tremendously because the majority of our income is moving more to tourism and such. So that would open up a market for Erie.
Absolutely. Not only we think of Erie going to see ball games in these metropolitan regions, but as you said, Fred, flip that around. We can have people in Cleveland, Buffalo, and Pittsburgh, or even Toronto, make a day trip into Erie, take advantage of our beaches, stay on our waterfront, and go home. More importantly, and this applies to the small rural communities in Erie County, it allows, if you had interconnectivity infrastructure, it allows those municipalities to stay where they are, work in larger metropolitan regions, and come back instead of having to leave the region. So this is both economical development and actually retention of the people that are living in Erie County.
Thank you.
We'll continue this conversation. We have a long meeting today. So Emily, thank you, Michael and Fred. If we can move forward now.
Yes. Just quickly, is there any other public that would like to speak? All right, hearing none, we can move on to our agenda with the Transportation Improvement Program. So if Brandon, you would like to discuss the 2021 TIP modifications.
Thanks, Emily. Yep, I can go through those quickly. We had a total, since the June 9th coordinating committee meeting, we had 7 administrative modifications to the 2021 Erie MPO Highway and Bridge TIP. None of these items on this list are amendments, so no vote is required here. And I wasn't going to go into any in detail, but if anyone had any questions with that first, then I'll go on to I'll wait for those before going to the informational items, which also include modifications regarding the 12th Street Corridor signals amendment.
Okay, any questions? Okay, let's move on.
Yep, we can go on then. So I'll wait till it's pulled up here. Yep. So in addition, there was 1 amendment and 4 administrative modifications to the 2021 interstate and statewide TIP that are listed here as informational items. I wanted to highlight a 12th Street signals project, which was an amendment because it had a construction cost increase of just over $2.2 million that required PMC, what we call them, but PennDOT PMC approval, so Program Management Committee. This committee looks over these higher cost increases, and this request was originally for a mix of Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP, set-aside funds, federal STP funds, and state 581 funding. But upon presentation to the PMC board on July 14th, it was determined that the entire cost increase could be funded with the HSIP set-aside funding. So this action was done by the statewide section and central office and received ESTIP approval on July 22nd. So no further action is needed by the MPO. And I didn't have anything else to highlight with this unless there are any questions.
Okay, thank you, Brandon.
All right, thank you.
All right, so next on the agenda is talking about our next TIP, the 2023 Transportation Improvement Program. There was a meeting to release the financial guidance from FHWA and PennDOT to start looking at our next 4-year TIP. So I briefly made a chart showing where the funding is at the moment. So we are going down in our funding. We'll see what happens with the federal infrastructure bill. But Courtney, would you like to talk about any of the carryover projects?
Yes, please. Do you mind if I share my screen?
Go ahead, please.
It says I cannot while you're sharing. Sorry, Emily. Okay, the first screen that I'm going to be sharing is actually just a kind of a breakdown of, similar to what Emily shared, by year, what funding we're looking at getting in 23 and 24 on the new TIP. The first 2 years of the 4-year TIP are always the most important. They're the 2 that we're going to be working within. And then we program out from there the projects that we would like to see continue, or carryover projects, as we refer to them. When we looked at the projects that we are proposing that we carry over, our total projects for the first 2 years are going to be about $29.8 million. And between those 2 years, we only have about $33 million on the TIP. So we are talking, this doesn't include any designing of new projects. It doesn't include looking at anything in addition to what we normally would have on here, or any sort of carryover project. So I just wanted to kind of let you guys know what we're talking about when we are talking about working with limited funding here for the next couple years. So with that, I'm going to bring up the report you guys are used to seeing, which is our spreadsheet with our draft projects. Let me enlarge it a little bit for you guys. So this is the spreadsheet that we start with whenever we're working in the district to look at what projects we want to try to start, to fund at what year and what type of funding that we're going to be putting them on. And Emily asked, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through all of the projects, because we're going to be doing that in the next couple of months quite intensively with you guys. But I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to look at any of the projects that we have listed on here. This is our first draft of the 2023 TIP. So there may potentially be changes. The big key things are, we are looking at keeping the local bridge line item. We may change the way we fund it to make it 100% BOF funds instead of using some state funds in there. So we would be looking at paying 95% with BOF funds and 5% of the project with the local. That 5% falls in line with what we have done historically, but we might just look at using BOF funds instead of state 183. We have our local federal aid route line item at $500,000 a year. We are looking at potentially adding a safety line item of $250,000 a year. That would allow us to incorporate low-cost safety projects that are brought to our attention, either through some sort of a safety assessment, or if there was something that came up in any sort of MPO or a meeting with a municipality that the traffic unit feels that a safety project might be in order, we could use that money towards that. We were looking at including our reflective pavement marker projects. We historically have done that at $95,000 a year for the whole county. We would like to continue that. And then most of the time, you guys are not necessarily that interested in individual bridges that we're looking at. You're more interested in what we're talking about with possibly paving. So I wanted to just go over those real quick. In the next year, we're going to be letting our Route 6 project at Union City that goes from 8 to the shed down there. So we're going to be letting that in 2022. It'll carry over into 2023. We're looking at a potential paving project on 8 from Baldwin to north of Kaiser. A paving project on 18 from the Crawford County line to 6N. 19 from Dorn Road to Robinson, and then also on 19 from 90 to Rotunda Drive. We're looking at a paving project on 20 from Herzl Road up to the New York line. There's also an ask that we look at Route 20 from Chestnut to Cumberland, which is not currently on the list, but we are looking at whether or not we might be able to add that. We're going to be finishing our 2 projects on 20 that we have on the current tip, which go from Chestnut to the 4-lane and Millfair to Zuck. In the city of Corey, we are looking at doing a project that is the concrete section that goes from Church Street to 426, as well as the paving project that incorporates 426, 2020, and 2029. We are looking at doing some work on 290. We have our projects that we are currently designing for Depot Road. We also have the one for 832 that goes from 26th Street to Presque Isle that also has the trail that the township is working on. We have our 6N underpass in Springfield Township that we're in design currently. We also are going to be finishing up the paving project on 3006, which goes from 20 to 226. We'll be finishing the Zuck Road project from Zimmerly to 26th Street, includes the bridge at Cascade, I do believe. And then our work on the Bayfront. Does anyone have any questions? I know I went through that very fast. We'll be sharing things as we continue to move forward.
Thank you, Courtney. This is really great to have. Just so everyone else that's in the meeting can get a sense of this, is there any money left over that municipalities could request to be moved from the LRTP into the TIP at this time?
Are we looking at new, say, paving projects, or you mean for additional work for streetscapes and things like that that they might be looking for as a part of one of our projects?
Specifically a new project, such as a streetscape. Is there any money left over for those types of projects, or is it just too tight at the moment with the carryover projects?
Brian and Ron may have some additional information. Right now, I would probably state that looking at adding projects that are not asset management based with either our bridges or our paving projects are probably, we're a little too tight in order to just add a 100% streetscape project. What we are really trying to promote with the municipalities is if there is a project, as you look at the TIP and we have future discussions moving forward for the next 12 years on the TIP, if you see a project that is going through one of your municipalities and you guys have had a comp plan or something that shows streetscapes or bike or pedestrian improvements, let us know as we're moving forward with our PennDOT Connects or any sort of a meeting, request one with us, and we can help you guys with applying for grants that we can incorporate into the projects to get you the work that you would like to see happen. And that is doable. We can incorporate TAP funding and multimodal funding. If you guys get it into things that we are doing, we are more than willing to look at that as we move forward. But we really are asking that the municipalities help us with things like that.
Courtney, we've broached this topic before. On Route 6 at Toyota Road, just east of Corey. We have talked about a roundabout there because of the traffic coming out of the industrial park, the high volume of traffic on Tip, and the main feeder route into town on Scioto. Now, I'm just putting this across the bow now because this is the type of project possibly you're looking for. We would like to have a meeting with the principals. I'll give you a call and see if we can get a meeting set up where we can at least start preliminary discussions. This is a 5 or 10 year project. I mean, it's not tomorrow. But is that the kind of thing you're looking for?
Yes. Yep. Anything that you are looking, then we can track that as we have a project that might be coming onto the tip. We can track what the municipalities are looking for. And then we can also try to help them as grant opportunities come up to know what ones that it might qualify for that they could apply for.
Okay, we'll be in touch then.
Okay, thank you.
Courtney, can you share that list and I will email it out to the municipalities so they know if there is a project to start getting in touch with you right now?
Yes, I will share the list of what our potential projects are. And again, I will probably be writing potential everywhere because it is a work in progress. I don't want anyone to think that just because something's on there, it's a definite done deal of there or not there. But we can share that for the first 4 years. And then as we get closer to having a finalized list for the next 8 years, which is how far we start looking, we'll make sure we share that so you guys can start looking and we can have conversations for the outer years as well. So this isn't a one and done anything, you know, and anytime you guys have something that comes up, Lindsay or myself, we're more than willing to participate in anything that you guys need so that we can help you guys get what you guys need grant wise to help with projects as they come forward. And Brian, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, Courtney. This is Jan Cavaday.
Oh,
go ahead, Jan.
We have a streetscape that we're looking to get funding for that'll be coming up as, you know, within the next couple of years. Is that something that we can go through PennDOT Connects with?
You mean for the actual streetscape? For the design of the streetscape or for the work that the streetscape design has?
I'm not sure, to be honest. We had WRA come in and do a streetscape. They did a charrette. They can put everything together and we have, like, I don't know if it's a final design, but we have the design put together.
Yes, then you'll want to reach out
now
to...
we're at the...
Yep, now you're at the point of trying to figure out how you're going to see it across the finish line and get the work done.
Correct.
Okay. Yes. If you reach out to Lindsay, we can set up where we can have a discussion about potential grant options out there that you guys could apply for as a project might come through. That would be mutually beneficial to you guys and to us.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add a few points, and this is probably a good segue into my topic as well. But yeah, to answer sort of Emily's original question, and based on what Courtney shared, the table that she shared initially shows a roughly $2 to $3 million decrease in funding to the Erie MPO per year on this new tip right now. So we of course had the prior tip fully programmed out into the out years. So, you know, the last 2 years of our current tip are the first 2 years of the new 2023 tip. So the answer is it's very tight. You know, the loss of 3 million out of 21 roughly is a big blow when you've already got almost every dollar accounted for. So, you know, just to level set the expectations for everybody right now, we're trying to figure out how we could possibly fund just what we have in the pipeline right now. We're all hopeful, I think, for good news, additional federal funds for infrastructure. If that goes through, you know, both at a statewide and at a district level, we're ready to respond to that very quickly to change financial guidance, change project lists, and so forth. But we would put that money to good use, immediately. That there will be no delays there for sure. But it's very, very tight. So those grants and those other competitive award opportunities, and I know I probably am a broken record. I just really, we've had great success in District 1 and in Erie County in particular in the past with TAP funds. They used to be TE, Transportation Enhancements. Now they're the Transportation Alternatives Program, federal funds. It's open right now for application. So, again, the awards are up to $1 million typically, sometimes more, but usually we see them in the million or less. 500, 600,000 is not uncommon for a sidewalk, a trail, a streetscape, or something like that. It's such a huge help to the tip. It just really alleviates a lot of those of that tightness that we're talking about. So I encourage the municipalities to pursue that. And we, the district, those projects are known to be a little bit difficult. It's difficult to deliver a project using federal funds. Anybody who on the call who's been part of them knows that. I can tell you that's what we do it every day. But of course, that's our business. We're used to all of those many requirements of environmental clearance, the NEPA process, right-of-way clearance, and so on. So I know it's a little bit intimidating, but I just
Yeah, it seems like he cut out. I'm not sure if he'll come back on. I don't know if it was his connection or power, but I guess he was just echoing what Courtney was saying.
Yeah, we can give Brian a few minutes. Hopefully he will rejoin us. I know he was going to talk about the Bayfront next on the agenda.
Okay.
So
okay. That's right.
We can push that back. Hopefully he will be able to rejoin. Let's see. I think he is coming into the waiting room again.
Sorry, Emily.
Oh, no worries. Can you hear us, Brian?
I can. I got completely booted out of the meeting, so I don't know where I cut off. But I was banging the drum for alternative projects. I hope anybody will consider it, and we at the district, are ready to assist because we highly appreciate when people go for them. It helps everybody, I think. Thanks. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Am I okay to launch into the presentation, or is there more on that topic,
no,
Emily?
Well, if anyone has any questions for Courtney or Brian about the 2023 funding, we can talk about that now, or just let Brian go into his presentation on the Bayfront.
Okay, let's move to the Bayfront then.
Okay, sharing my screen. Can you see the Bayfront funding? Great. Yeah. Thank you. So this is a fairly quick presentation. I know Tom McClellan has presented updates on where we are with the Bayfront project not too long ago. The intent is I would like to give a similar presentation to the coordinating committee in September. So I just want to let everybody know where we are regarding the funding on this project. So again, we'll go through a quick overview for anybody on the meeting who isn't familiar. I think most of us are, and talk about the history of funding, where we are today, and where we hope to go. And that image on the right side of the screen, if you haven't seen it, is just one of the many conceptual pedestrian bridges that our consultants have drawn up for Holland Street. So this shows you're looking from a bird's eye view of what would be the Holland Street roundabout. The multimodal hub is kind of to the top left there, and that's what that parking lot is for. And then this bridge would take off from south of the parkway and take pedestrians and bicyclists over the parkway to that kind of winding ramp. So some great ideas have been generated. Just a reminder of how we got here. So the Bayfront Corridor study was started in 2015, took about 2 years to complete. Many public meetings, lots of involvement and outreach, looking at the entire corridor from 12th Street to 12th Street. So it had a lot of important, potential improvements that could be programmed at any point in time. Right around the same time, the Erie MPO is going through its last long-range plan update. And this project was ranked as the number one project in that entire long-range plan. So that was part of the reason that it was successful in getting funded and why we're where we are today. Just to give an overview, what the Central Bayfront project includes is really the three intersections of Sassafras Street Extension, State Street, and Holland. So this is not the entire, that study from 2015 looked at a lot more. We couldn't do everything the study recommended in one project. We had to start somewhere. And this made sense, I think, to everybody, just about everybody we talked to, as the priority. You'll see on the far right of your screen, that's the Soldiers and Sailors bridge over the railroad. That's sort of a part of this project by necessity, as we talk about removing railroad tracks from the Bayfront between basically State Street and Holland, just to a point east of Holland. We have to replace those tracks. We can't just remove them. So as we replace them, those red lines show where we would be replacing those tracks in kind, which required that bridge over at the Soldiers and Sailors home. So more on that. That's under construction now. I haven't had a chance to drive by, but I hope to next week, just to see how they're progressing. That is a multimodal bridge, so it does not have a sidewalk, but it is open to pedestrians, bicyclists, and cars, obviously, and not a lot of traffic. It really, before the maintenance and others, and that's an active cemetery, of course, on the north side. So lots of people needed to get across the tracks. They used an at-grade crossing in the past. And with the additional tracks that we're adding, those red lines, that wasn't going to be a good solution anymore. So the bridge became necessary. So that'll serve for not only for maintenance vehicles getting across, but also if there's a funeral or for any other future reason why a vehicle might need to cross there. Oops. Reminder, so this is the Sassafras Street Extension. It's a dual lane roundabout. Everything you see in pink are trails, sidewalks, or multi-use paths. So one of the things that we did recently was the peer review, which looked at this roundabout more closely and found that on the north leg, we could trim that down from 2 lanes to just 1 in each direction, which was a benefit to the pedestrians crossing that street. So shorten their crossing, only crossing 1 lane at a time as they make that crossing. Reminder again, the purple is a future pedestrian bridge. So it's part of the overall project, but not part of phase 1 that we are advancing using the build grant funds. So we recognize that as a need here, just not one that will be funded in the first phase. Moving on to State Street, it's a grade separation. So we're just really removing the railroad tracks, putting the through traffic under the intersection, and just shrinking that entire intersection. So really it'll be at about the same elevation that it is today, only it'll be a much smaller intersection, much more comfortable for pedestrians and bicyclists. A lot of trails, a lot of green space again. Bike lanes on State Street will be part of this. And some of what you see on this drawing is part of the Port Authority's project, which is related but separate from the Bayfront Parkway project. Also, just again, there's a lot of trail connections part of this project where there haven't been in the past. And that's everything, again, that you see in pink. The purple is just a conceptual pedestrian bridge that, again, of everything you see here, that pedestrian bridge is not part of phase one. So we're not proposing that with the first phase of funding. Holland Street intersection, the first slide showed that conceptual view of that pedestrian bridge, again, in a dual lane roundabout. Similarly here, the peer review of the roundabout found that it was designed exactly correctly. The only tweak that they made that we decided to make based on that review was, again, a reduction of lanes on the north side of that intersection. So again, shorter, simpler crossing for pedestrians on that part of the project. Here's kind of the information. Sorry, I think it's mostly text from here on out on my presentation with maybe one image, but just the funding of how we got here. In 2017, we had $2.6 million of spike funding, also called discretionary funding. That's federal funding that was available, and we were able to use to start the preliminary engineering phase of the project. As that started to roll in 2018 and 2019, we received $30 million total of additional discretionary funding from the Secretary of Transportation and the Secretary of DCED, Secretary Davin. So that really kickstarted the project, made it where it's not just a preliminary engineering hopeful, it was a real project with real money. We, in 2018, applied for a federal build grant, but were unsuccessful. We did get additional multimodal funding to help with the railroad relocation and some of their crossings. So that money is shown there in 2018 and 2020. We tried again for an infra grant. That's another federal grant in 2020, and we're not successful. And then finally in 2020, we were successful in getting the build grant in the amount of $21 million. We asked for the full amount, which was $25 million, and got just under that. So adding all those bits and pieces together, we have about $61 million total of secured funds on the project that I just showed you. And here's the gap. So the current estimate of the project that we want to let as phase one. So this is not including those two pedestrian bridges at State and Sassafras that I said are not part. This is everything else. We still have a funding gap. There's a couple reasons for that, several reasons. First off, I would say the build grant decrease from what we asked for to what we got. We got $4 million less than what we were after there. That's part of the gap. Part of the gap are utility increases. So we had estimated about $1 million for utilities. Very difficult to estimate utility relocation costs before you enter a project. Right now, we're looking at $7 million potentially for utility relocations. That's putting aerial utilities underground in certain places. Other conflicts and things like that we run into. The railroad costs increased as well. So there have been many increases, and then of course we live in a world where general construction increases are a normal part of it. So altogether, we see a funding gap right now of 15 to 25 million. This is the only slide I think that will be different when I present to the coordinating committee. Is we'll include additional details of each phase and where those gaps are exactly. But I just wanted to share this with the MPO, with the TAC here, to start the conversation. We've got a tight tip. We've got a massive project that has been successful in gaining this huge amount, $61 million of funds that so far really haven't touched the Erie tip. So if you think about it in terms of, if the Erie tip gets about $20 million a year, what we've been able to pull in additional to that on this project is 3 years worth of money. It'd be like if any one of us got a bonus of 3 times your salary. It's an unbelievable opportunity. And the question, I think, is how do we fill the gap? That's the obvious question. There's a lot of different ways that could happen. These are all coulds. None of them, absolutely not a single one, are guaranteed. they are only within the realm of possibility. So member designated projects, also known as earmarks, we talked about those a little bit in prior meetings, I think. They are back as part of, potentially as part of infrastructure bill and maybe other bills. We have worked with Emily and others to make sure that we at least make our requests and our needs known to our senator and representative in our area. I don't have a final word on that. So, you know, I don't think we know where those will land, but there may be future options or opportunities for those as well. Build grants are now called raise grants. So that's another potential future opportunity. Spike funds, as I mentioned, and managed out of central office. PennDOT manages those. So those are, again, spike discretionary, pretty much the same thing. We don't get the sense that there are a lot of those available for this tip update, but we are going to carry on that conversation. Those competitive TAP and multimodal grants that I mentioned, we'd like to talk more with the city about a TAP application, maybe to go along with this project. We think that's that it would be eligible, it could be helpful. And then, you know, the bottom two, and I'll really focus on the second to last one, Erie MPO tip funds. So again, we haven't used any regional tip funds on this project yet. And as we go into this tip update, I think the question becomes, what is the Erie MPO willing to invest in this project? Again, that's ranked #1 on the long range plan. City and county funds, I only put those on there. I haven't talked to the city or county. So again, a double asterisk by those. I'm just saying that those would be possible sources if you know, if it were possible to those organizations. And I'll leave you with another image of that pedestrian bridge. And I guess, you know, you can think about that gap in funding and picture, if you close your eyes and picture the most boring pedestrian bridge that you've ever seen in that place versus what you see there, you know, the question comes to what is right for this project. I think, you know, we deliver about roughly 20-25 projects a year. PennDOT does in Erie County. This project is a really, you know, how often does a project like this come along? Similar in magnitude to the Bayfront Parkway itself or other huge projects that you maybe only see once every quarter of a century, really. So the question, you know, remains is what level of investment we can handle and where all we can get those other funds. But that's the state of the funding for this project. Wanted to make sure everybody was aware. We do have a gap, and we're going to continue working to try to fill that gap in every way we can. Thanks for the time, Emily. Any questions?
Thank you, Brian. I think the thing that is interesting is that with the decrease in funding on a relatively consistent basis over the last 2 or 3 years, it's remarkable that you've been able to pull together what you have. I think we are really stretched. We just did a study in Corey going for some additional funding, and to do the paving in Corey would be $24 million. You know, to do a comprehensive paving plan. We just wanted to know where we were at. So that's these are big numbers, and every community faces them. And I think that hopefully in this infrastructure bill, we will be able to come out maybe with some new programs and guidelines with more federal help, not only to the major projects, but also the small communities. As a citizen of Erie County, this is kind of the flagship location in Erie County as far as visibility and tourism, etc. And the better we make it, I think the more successful we'll be in developing the downtown. But our dilemma is that we in the small communities are also facing a lot of fiscal restraints. So it's going to be a balance. I think we have to cooperate. I think the big challenge is going to be holding the project within certain guidelines of funding so that we don't go over too badly. And I know you'll be working hard on that. So those are just some of my observations. I don't want to see the project stop because we have so much momentum now. And usually if you don't take that momentum and carry through with it, a lot of times you'll lose it. So I think we need to keep the momentum there. Maybe, again, this is a difficult question. Are there scale downs on it that would not damage the momentum?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think any project could probably always be scaled down to some degree. I can tell you what makes it complicated on this one is the build grant, which we're overjoyed to have been awarded. But because of the requirements of that program, there are there's a benefit cost ratio that's part of that sort of analysis. And as we see it, we don't believe we can divide out any of those intersections without at least putting maybe a little bit of that build money at risk. So, there's possibly a way to do it, but we just need to work with federal highways as we consider what that could look like as far as like a phased option, maybe, leave one intersection out of this for now or something like that. Another way of scaling, as I kind of said at the end there are, what you see on your screen, if you're looking at the pedestrian bridge there is something that, of course, as we go through all of our public involvement, we're hearing a lot. We've consistently heard, hey, let's do this right. We've got one shot at this. Now, I would not say that we have one shot at this. I'd say that, we should all keep in mind that these things unfold over time and sometimes include multiple projects and multiple funding efforts. But the iconic look, the aesthetic look, and the context of what you have in this location, we're hearing that overwhelmingly that's important to everyone we talk to. So just to use the pedestrian bridge as one small example, you could, I'll just throw out a number, pay say $8 million for what you see on your screen, or you could get the $2 million version. But does that meet the community vision consistent with the Erie plan, comprehensive planning, and all of that? Those are all tough questions. You're right, though, Mayor. We do have to look for, I think, a balance here.
Hey, Brian, this is Tim May.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, I just wanted to mention, I think that PennDOT has done a wonderful job in listening to the city of Erie and the private-public partnership, and you've taken input from, Erie Insurance and Hammett and Gannon on what they see. I think you've done a wonderful job in listening to, paring it down a little bit already from, we certainly had the platinum version to start with, and I think you've done a nice job just kind of listening and, hearing their request on really what would work with the connection to the Bayfront. So well done.
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Brian, this is Honey Stumka. I was curious, what happened with the transit funds for the pedestrian bridge at Holland? Did I miss that in the presentation?
There was a possibility of seeking competitive transit funds for that.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, I don't know the latest on that. Sorry,
Okay.
I'll have to ask and get back to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, good question. I think, yeah, you're right. I forgot because of the multimodal center. I think that was something we had on the table as we were looking at any possible opportunity for additional funding, but we'll circle back to that.
Well, I think
Brian, this is Courtney.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Okay.
That particular pedestrian bridge did not qualify for the competitive transit funds, that the grant that we were looking for. But we're continuing to look at the notice of funding opportunities as they come out to see if there's any that might apply to any aspect of the project.
Right.
Thanks.
I think, Brian, the bottom line right now is, if I've told my people in Corey, I want a whole shelf full of projects prepared for these new rounds of federal funding as they're going to pop out. And it's going to be a one and done, because after they spend all the money out of the larder, it's going to be pretty empty. So I think we're in a good position right now with this project to be competitive for those transportation infrastructure grants when they come out. It's going to be interesting in the next couple of months. I was hoping the next couple of days, because it looks like they're really going to have a battle in Congress. But once those funds hit, we have to be ready immediately with, with requests. And I'm sure that you have that all lined up within this project. So maybe you can get that shortfall partly done by that.
Yeah, great point. Right. Any amount. I mean, to have a project that is close to shovel ready and no doubt, I would say in my mind, meets every requirement for almost any transportation program that could exist. I mean, we're already running, so it's not a matter of hitting the ground running. We've been running for years on this. It's ready to go. So yeah, if anything like that could, if we could get any of those funds on this project, it just frees up more of everything. But yeah, good point.
Okay, any other questions? Well, thank you. Excellent presentation, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so next on our agenda will be the federal funding. So Kevin McCullough, do you have any insights on where we are with our federal funding or our state funding?
Yeah, after that discussion, that's a tough one to follow there. It's always tough to follow Brian, but I'll do my best here. So I'll talk real quickly. I'll go over, again, what I know. And a lot of you, again, if you're staying tuned to the news cycle, you're probably more informed than I am. I know we had a Shenango Valley MPO meeting yesterday, and at 11 o'clock, they started meeting in the House to discuss this. It's been anywhere from 1 to 1.2 trillion. And I think it's one of those things, let's wait till it's passed to find out how much is in it and what's in it. But we do know a few details about the legislation, obviously. And again, it impacts all of us, all of us sitting around here, of course, being purveyors of transportation. It's obviously very important. So again, trying to figure out what's been passed and what, where we are. I will say that yesterday the Senate did pass. I'll call it a 1 trillion right now. I was calling it 1.2, but lately I've been hearing 1 trillion, but somewhere around there. And I'm going to call it, it's called a jobs bill, but in essence, we're talking reauthorization here. This is an authorization bill for transportation and for transit and those components. I'm going to separate it. I'm going to stay away from the 3.5 trillion that I'll call it human infrastructure. That's another thing that's being handled through reconciliation, which I know the House jumped right into immediately following. I'm sorry, the Senate immediately jumped right into yesterday following the approved infrastructure bill. So with this bill, just again, in very rough terms, it provides $560 billion more dollars over, I believe it's 5 years. I'm not 100% sure on that. I've heard 4 years and I've heard 5 years, but it provides that over that period of 5 years, in addition to what we are getting currently through the FAST Act. So if you do the math and you add that up, it gets you to around 800 million, and then there's a few hundred million, give or take, for some other type broadband impacts, some transit, Amtrak, some of those kinds of pieces. So with that, again, just kind of keep that in mind. So as we move forward here, obviously you're going to be hearing about this reconciliation bill, but obviously we want to know, we want to know what's going on, in particular with this infrastructure bill. What's this $1 trillion? What does that get us? So obviously one of the most important things is, as of right now, there's $100 billion for roads and bridges. And again, as I bring up some of these terms and talk about this, keep in mind that, we still have a ways to go. We're only halfway there, but it's looking like we're heading in this direction. Obviously, I mentioned some broadband type things, freight and passenger rail. So there's again, we're hearing stuff about weather resilience, climate change, things like that. For the most part, most of those were amended out of this bill, with the idea being is that second piece, that human infrastructure, would pick up a lot of those pieces. However, there are pieces in here, there are components to that, and we're not sure what those impacts will be until the legislation gets passed. So just kind of keep that in mind as we move forward. So obviously, if you're tuned into the news cycle, again, you've probably heard some pluses and minuses, and obviously one of our things at PennDOT here, and one of the things that I kind of look at when I talk about this, is that, the Highway Trust Fund has always been that's always kind of been transportation's holy grail. It was the money that came in was money that we had as transportation purveyors to, it wasn't touched as part of all of the other general fund and all the other federal funding. And, that stopped a long time ago, unfortunately. And when the Highway Trust Fund was running short, instead of coming up with that funding, we started borrowing from the general fund. And that's been to the tune of over $100 billion over the life of the FAST Act and the previous federal reauthorization. Unfortunately, we're looking at doubling that debt as of right now. They've been talking, about some of the, I guess they call them like setbacks, things that will be helping to fund this particular bill, and that it's a good thing to do. But just keep in mind that we are going to be borrowing most likely $100+ billion to make this funding work going through the next 4 or 5 years. So again, that's just something we kind of keep track of, because again, from the Highway Trust Fund standpoint, unless someone comes up with a way to make the Highway Trust Fund full, the gas tax, federal gas tax, hasn't gone up since 1993. So you can see what we're up against. But this is a different time, and we have to take a step back and look at the positives for transportation. And like Brian said, there's some of these earmarks and some of these grants and some of this stuff coming along here. We talked a lot about that. Again, the goal there was to pick projects that are currently in play, so that if funding does come our way, that will displace that funding on the current TIP, and then we can use the TIP funding to do other good things, other priorities. So hopefully this thing all kind of plays out the way we think it is. As far as timing goes on the federal side of things, your guess is as good as mine. We'll have to kind of watch this. It's a day-to-day thing. I know they're trying to push this through. It may happen pretty quickly. And if in fact, what we're hearing is that there's no reauthorization bill without reconciliation and without that 3.5 trillion, I don't think there's anything standing in the way of doing that. So I look for this to move pretty quickly. But we'll see. There could be some roadblocks in the way. We'll see what kind of amendments are brought forward. So we still have to, get through this second half. So sorry to be general in a lot of these things, and I can't really be too specific. Let me talk quickly though about impacts this may have on us directly with regards to TIP development. As you know, we're kicking off TIP development right now. We have financial guidance in place, which it's not very, it's kind of depressing looking at the current financial guidance. Obviously, we're looking at some of these funding programs and some of the proposals, and so far things match up pretty well with the FAST Act with regards to safety funding, bridge funding, NHPP funding, the Transportation Alternatives Program. So those programs seem to be intact right now, so that's a good thing. So it's not a matter, hopefully it's not a matter of completely redoing financial guidance. It's a matter of applying the formulas that have already been approved to those funding categories. And if this all happens in time and we get this money, then we can start assuming that we're going to get it as part of the 2023 program update. I can't talk to impacts to the current program. We won't know that until something happens here, but there is, if it does move fast, there could be impacts to the 2022 program, to our current program. So we'll have to kind of take that step by step as it happens. But as far as any new programs and things like that, the talk that we have right here is that if the financial guidance work group needs to get together again to talk through any new programs or any new funding sources, things like that, that we need to sort out, then we'll do what we need to do to make sure that, you know, that as funding becomes available, that we have it, you know, distributed out to our planning partners across the state as quickly as possible so that, you know, those impacts can, you know, that funding can start to be utilized. So, so we'll see. We'll see. There's still a lot of unknowns. So I apologize for a lot of the unknowns, but stay tuned. It could be changing right now as I'm speaking. Things may have changed already. So keep that in mind, you know, as we move forward here. So, let me jump over to T-Rock real quick, Emily, and then if there's any questions on anything that I've talked about, I'll take those questions. So, so back early August, about a week ago, Secretary Gramian, our Transportation Secretary, released the final report to Governor Tom Wolf, and this is for the Transportation Revenue Options Commission final report. So I just wanted to just make you aware of that. There is a final report out there that is available, and Brandon, if you're online, if you could provide that link, that would be great. But we do have that TROC report that is out there that is available. And that out on PennDOT.gov/funding. If you go out there and search for the TROC report and PennDOT, you will find it utilizing Google. I highly recommend that you go out there and take a look at that report. It is by no means final. This is what we're going to do. This is it's a set of recommendations, and there's just a lot of interesting information in there that I think, again, as members of the TAC and as of the coordinating committee and as, you know, people who are involved in infrastructure, I think there's a lot of good things that you can kind of, you know, and it's pretty easy reading. There's a lot of graphs. There's a lot of things in there. It's not real wordy. But I just recommend you go in there and take a look at that. And it really is a list of proposals. This is kind of a menu of items for, you know, legislators and for transportation practitioners, all of us, to really just kind of think about, ponder on, and really this is just kind of that first step. You know, this is kind of a conversation starter. What are some of the options that could be legislative or changes that we could implement to provide more transportation funding? We also take this in context with what's happening at the federal level, what I just talked about with reauthorization and with additional money coming in. Obviously, that has an impact. You know, if we get more federal funding, obviously we'll have to take that in context that more federal funding could mean, you know what, hey, we need a little more state funding to provide matches for that federal funding. So the impact of the federal funding is certainly going to have impact on decision making with regards to additional state funding, and whether we need some, whether we need all of it, you know, whatever that ends up being. But again, it's a conversation starter. So, so again, I highly, you know, encourage you to go out there and take a look at that report. And I'll just kind of close by saying that there's been a lot of talk, particularly in the press, that, wow, this is a PennDOT report. This is a report that's coming from PennDOT. Of course, they need money, you know, whatever. Here we go again, going back to Act 89 from 7 or 8 years ago. But I'll just point out that really, you know, Secretary Gramian, again, you know, PennDOT assisted with the report, but really, if you look at the commission itself, there was only one official member out of what, 50 or so members on that commission that was from PennDOT. So there was a lot of input from across the board, from a lot of other agencies, a lot of the, again, from transit, rail, a lot of other, you know, multimodal agency, economic development. We had a lot of folks that were involved in that commission. So it was purposeful when Governor Wolf asked about that commission that it not be PennDOT heavy, that it not be PennDOT centric with regards to membership on that committee. So I just want to kind of pass that along just as information. So as you're going through that report, just kind of keep in mind, you know, what the reason was for that report and what that focus was. So, so with that, I'll take a step back here and stop talking and see, you know, if there's any questions, if there's any way I can answer them. Hopefully I can, but yeah, if there's any questions, Emily, I'll be happy to take those.
I just wanted to say the report is in the chat box if anyone hasn't noticed.
Great. Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate it.
Okay, if there are no questions, Emily, you want to move on?
Sure, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much.
All right, so next on the agenda, we have the local federal aid route line item. So there are $500,000 available for paving projects. Thank you for all of the submissions that we received. And thank you to PennDOT for going out and driving the roads and giving them all a condition ranking. So based on the condition ranking that PennDOT established and the ADTs, the funding that would be assigned is written out here. So $250,000 for Arbuckle and Mill Creek, $90,115.67 for Cherry Street in the city of Erie, and $1,590,884.33 for West 32nd Street in Mill Creek Township. So if everyone is comfortable with the ranking, I would entertain a motion at this point to recommend these roads for funding.
Do we have a motion?
Emily, this is Matt Waldinger. I'd make a motion to recommend these.
Okay.
This
Matt?
is Honey Stemka. I'll second.
Okay, Honey, second. Okay, is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, we'll do a vote. Are there any negative votes? Everyone who wants to vote positively, say aye.
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 Aye. The ayes carry it. So thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, wonderful. So the next on our agenda is the $5 local use fee update. So with your meeting materials, you should have received a summary of the discussion that the subcommittee had on July 30th. So I'll let John Tushak, the chairman, take over and discuss.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Yes, we had a meeting of the $5 local use fee subcommittee for the local bridges on July 30th of this year. And you can see the summary of that meeting up on the screen. We talked about the fiscal report and the assigned funds. And there's a blank square next to the, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there you go. The last line in red there, over in the balance, it looks like we had it all assigned up to $600 balance. It's not in that square right there, but yes, up until June of this year, we had all the money assigned with the exception of $600. Then in June 1st of 21, we received another allocation of $538,750 for a current fund balance of $539,350. That's available now to be assigned. So then we talked about the current prioritization process for projects, and we voted unanimously to retain the current method of prioritization. So next page. Then we talked about new business, and this number one under funding adjustments, Leet Road, Netter Road, there was some discussion about the design funds and the possibility of maybe having to return those funds. But then we further discussed giving these municipalities every opportunity to retain those funds. So as we stand right now, we're working with them to retain those funds. So they're not yet available for reallocation. We'd like to see those funds stay with those municipalities if at all possible. But there's some technicalities in the rules, and we need to work through all that to come up with a way to allow those municipalities to retain those funds for design. Construction is not a problem. And then we talked about Sherrod Hill Road Bridge. Am I correct, Emily, that went from a rehab to a replacement?
Yes.
Yeah. So they have a cost of it. Once the project, the design started, they realized it was not a strong candidate for rehabilitation, so it's going to be replaced. And we voted to assign $177,000 to that project to cover the overrun. Then we moved to Cockwa Avenue Bridge and the study funds that were already approved for $75,000. But then we discussed following the neighborhood survey that we did was quite extensive, and we got a lot of good feedback on that. We decided that the study wasn't really needed. We got the information we needed from the neighborhood survey, and PennDOT concurred. So we would like to vote later on here to return the $75,000 to the fund. We will not do the study. We will use the data we received from the neighborhood survey to move into final design. Then we discussed new funding opportunities for bridges. And that amount right there, the $1,055,000 that you see, isn't exactly correct until we decide what's going to happen with Leet Road, Netter Road. So what we're really working with right now is the balance of $539,350, not the $1,055,000. Correct, Emily?
Yes. So yes, and technically with the Sherrod Hill getting more money and then Cockwa Avenue returning money, it changes a bit as well.
Right, and I'm going to talk through that. I was going to start with the $539,350, and then by subtracting the $177 for Sherrod Hill Road, adding back the $75,000 from Cockwa, and then another discussion we had was I have actual bids now for the demolition of Cockwa. That was originally wasn't really an estimate. It was a fund balance of $165,387. The real number came in on a bid of $200,500. So I asked the committee to cover the difference in the funding with $35,000, and seeing that we just returned $75,000 of study money, I asked to then cover the bid overrun of $35,000, and that passed. So in essence, we really wound up returning $40,000 to the fund. So by the time you took the $539,350, subtracting the $177 for Sherrod Hill, add back the $75,000 that we returned, and then deduct the $35,000 for the bid overrun, that leaves us with a balance. And Emily, I checked the math a couple times. It looks like $402,350, not $403,350.
All right,
I
believe you.
You can check me. I think it's okay. But in the green there, the 403,350, I think it's 402,350. So that's what we have unassigned right now. And there's a couple other bridges there. We talked about Donation Road and Ordocks Road. But that fund balance isn't enough to cover those. And another option we talked about is beginning with, since Cocqua Avenue's ranked #1 on the list right now, and we need to continue to move forward with that. The demolition will be completed by October. We talked about proposing that the 402,350 be allocated to preliminary engineering and final design, and sort of phase that, and then ask for construction money later when a new allocation comes. So that the design money is estimated to be about that amount. So that would be our proposal. So we're going to ask for a vote on that. We're going to ask for 4 votes, actually. The change on Sherrod Hill Road, the returning of the study funds, the covering of the bid overrun, and then the covering of the preliminary engineering and final design for Cocqua. So that's a summary of everything we talked about. Emily, you can take it from here.
Okay, Emily, why don't we bring these up for vote individually?
Sounds good, Mayor Mitchell.
Mayor Mitchell, this is Harbor Creek. Do we have a moment, or can I have a moment, please?
Yes.
Okay. We're being fortunate enough to be one of the first to replace a bridge. We're very thankful for. It was Harbor Creek's understanding that the amount was for the entire project. And yes, we have forgone going through the selection of a designer. We went with our own engineer, which we understand is not reimbursable. The balance that the subcommittee had mentioned, I think, was about 341,000. Is that right, Mr. Tushak, somewhere in there?
Well, the balance with you still retaining your design money is 402,350. This action to design Cocqua Avenue does not jeopardize your design money. That's assuming you still have your design money.
Yeah, and I guess what we are considering is, you know, we're a little bit hesitant or reluctant in returning the full amount of the design fee because, and I understand, Emily has explained that, you know, down the road, if our construction costs do overrun, there will be money available. I'm a little nervous about opening ourselves up to the full amount, or, you know, to a balance at the end of the project. We would be willing to return, as of now, roughly, I think it was like $175,000, if that, if the subcommittee would be accepting of that.
Well, I think what the subcommittee intends to do is revisit the rules and, and see, I mean, there may be a way that you can retain all your funds since they were allocated to you. And
all right,
that's what I would like to work towards. But
then we will just go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say we have to stay within the rules on these allocations, but if we can revisit those rules, you know, and there may be a mechanism to allow for sole sourcing. If we can go through that and discover a way, that's what we would like to do. And in the end, you know, if it comes down to we can't meet the rules and the rules can't be changed or modified, you know, you may have to return some funds, but hopefully it won't come to that. And then if you do return design funds, of course, it can always come back to the committee if you have cost overruns in construction to be reallocated those funds through another action.
Correct. Okay. All right. Very well. And, you know, we will encourage our engineer to continue to work towards the construction phase of this project.
Okay, now, Emily, the first vote up, you want to read it out?
I can do that. So the first action item is for Sherwood Hill Road Bridge to increase the funding by $177,000 to for the change in scope from rehabilitation to replacement.
Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, John makes the motion. Do we have a second?
At Jonas, I'll second.
Okay, any discussion? We'll call the roll. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any negative? Okay, it passes. Emily, on to the next one.
All right, so there is an action item for Kakwa Avenue Bridge to return their study funds of $75,000.
Okay, do we have a motion for that?
Bill Kuhn, I make the motion.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, 20 seconds. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, carried.
All right, the third action is for Kakwa Avenue Bridge to allocate funds to cover the low bid of the bridge demolition, so $35,000.
Harbor Creek will make that motion.
Okay, and do we have a second?
Bill Kuhn will second.
Okay, any other further questions? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Are there any negative votes? Okay, it's passed. Okay, Emily?
The last motion is for Kakwa Avenue Bridge to allocate the remaining balance, $402,350, to start the preliminary engineering of the Kakwa Avenue Bridge replacement.
Do we have a motion to that effect?
And final design.
And final design.
Final design. Do we have a motion?
Harbor Creek will make that motion.
Okay, do we have a second?
Bill Kuhn will.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? I'll call for the roll. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any negative? Okay, carried. Okay, Emily?
All right, thank you. The next thing on the agenda is the Unified Planning Work Program update. So I included a draft of the UPWP in your meeting packets with the general highlights of what we will be planning for the next 2 years. Does anyone have any comments they would like to talk about on the draft? All right, this will be brought again in our subsequent meetings and hopefully adopted on December 8th at the coordinating committee. So there will be a few other chances to look at this if you didn't get a chance to read it yet. The one thing that would be very good to talk about today is the study funds. So we have about $80,000 in our budget left over for special studies. So studies that the municipalities can apply to the MPO to receive. So last round, Mill Creek received some study funds for their traffic circulation study, and the city of Erie received some funds for the 38th Street signal timing. So we have some funding available again. So I included the description of the different studies we have, so UPWP, supplemental studies, and PennDOT Connect studies, as well as a timeline of when these applications will be due and the application form. So according to this timeline, the applications will be due September 7th, so within a month, to me, and then on September 8th at the coordinating committee, presentations will be made by the project sponsors. So it is a 1-month timeline for the applications. And then in November 10th, this group, the TAC, can get together to decide which studies will be submitted for the UPWP base, the supplemental, and PennDOT Connects. So I wanted to go through the criteria and the timeline of this process with this committee to make sure you're comfortable with the timeline and criteria. So is there any comments or suggestions to make this process different or better? So right now, the application is basically creating a cost estimate and creating a narrative description of the project need, what stakeholders were involved in the creation of that study, and what are the desired outcomes. And priority will be given to those that are already in a planning process, such as the 2017 long-range transportation plan, our current long-range transportation plan that's being developed, or any municipal comprehensive plans. Does this sound okay with everyone? If it does, we would need a vote to approve this application.
Basically, we'll be calling for a motion to move this forward to the coordinating committee, right, Emily?
Actually, because the timeline is so tight with this, we need to approve this application now so that municipalities can apply at the next coordinating committee meeting.
Okay, then we'll need a motion to approve this now through the TAC. Do we have a motion to approve?
This is Honey. I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay.
Wesley will second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any negative votes? Okay, Emily, you can move it forward then.
All right. So the next thing on our list is actually the WRA Long Range Transportation Plan update. So Scott is with us today, who is working very diligently on our LRTP update. I will stop sharing my screen so he can share his.
And Emily, I've got Lisa Murphy with me today as well. So we'll tag team the presentation. I know you guys get to hear me talk a lot, so I thought Lisa could help out with this.
Wonderful, welcome.
Do you think you need to plug in the charger?
I'll plug it in.
You guys able to see my screen now?
Yes, thank you, Scott.
Great. So today we're going to give you an update on the public engagement, the results from the Wikimap exercise and the public survey, and coincidentally also give you a presentation on some of the financial aspects of the plan, which I think will sync up pretty well with some of the things that we heard earlier. So Lisa, do you want to talk about the Wikimap?
Sure. Morning, everybody. I'm Lisa Murphy. I work with Scott at WRA, and I will be giving you some of the presentation of our results this morning. So we reached out to the public with two different things. One is a survey with questions that we'll get to the results later. And the other item was a Wikimap. So what you're looking at right now is what the Wikimap looks like for anyone who has not ever used one. It's a website that we can direct people to, and they can, just like Google Maps, zoom in, zoom out, look at satellite images, and they can click a point anywhere on that map and tell us about something. Either ideas they have for improvements or something that's wrong, pavement that needs fixed, intersection side issues, anything like that. So that's what we did. I believe we opened this up in the end of April and we ran it through the middle of June. And we received 387 total comments on our wiki map. And Scott, if you go to the next slide, what we've done is taken those comments, brought them into GIS so that I can work with them a little bit more. And the first thing we did, I pulled out any of the comments that were not transportation, which there are always some of those, requests for dog parks, etc. So that pulled out 55 and that left us with 332 comments that you see on this map. And the first thing we did was see which ones overlay with the projects that we have from the previous plan. So issues that have already been identified and there's something in the works that should address it. And you'll see there are 12 there that say partial project match. That's where there's an issue that someone brought up and there's a project there, but the project doesn't quite cover it, but it could. So for example, an intersection where there's a project already, but somebody mentioned something about stormwater. Well, the current project doesn't say anything about stormwater, but it could. You could add that in to the scope of the project. So that's what those 12 are. So we do have a fair number, about a third of those comments are things that are already in the process of being addressed with the projects that we have. If you want to go back, Scott, actually go back to that summary. There we go. The other remaining comments, there are 51 that are strictly sidewalk issues. Sidewalk is messed up here or it's missing entirely and needs to be put in. Those we pulled out separately because that's kind of a different animal in terms of addressing. So those comments are not forgotten, but we will get those directed to the local folks who can work on those. So those got pulled out. And then the remaining 179 comments, the ones in yellow, are things that are new, things that don't appear anywhere in the other projects. And I've gone through and consolidated those into 80 different issues because you'll have, 5 or 6 people comment on the same intersection, for example. So those got consolidated into one issue for that intersection so that we can start addressing those. So Scott, if you want to jump to the new issues map, there we go. So those 179 comments got typed. The colors tell you what type. Lots of intersection issues, 64. Lots of comments about Lawrence Park, which is not surprising given the recent study there. Lots of bike ped issues, requests for safer bike accommodations, and so forth, and some speeding, traffic calming, and so forth. And these are overlaid on the jurisdictions of the roadways because that gives us a clue who's going to be able to address them. The blue is the national highway system, purple is the state, green is the non-state federal aid, and anything on a local road it'll be on a gray road. And also I made those squares so that you can easily see those. There aren't very many on local roads. Most of the comments were on either state roads or NHS. So that's where we ended up with on the mapping. Scott, do you have anything to add or should we pause for questions?
Oh, we can pause for questions.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions about this? Our next step is we'll sit down with Emily and go through this list of needs and try to make projects out of them. And then we'll be, I think, Emily, we talked about sending these lists out to the individual municipalities to get their perspectives as well.
Yes. So yeah, this is a really great GIS map. I'm really happy with the analysis that is so visual and easy to read. There are definitely some issues that I'm sure the municipalities know about that are not on this map from the public that need to be integrated, and some things that are on this map that the municipalities don't want to support or don't think are issues that can be addressed readily, that can be removed. So there still will be some tweaking. So please do look out for emails from me and Scott to discuss the tweaking of this map in the different municipalities.
Okay, well, if there are no questions, the next thing we wanted to take a look at was the recent funding guidance that we received from PennDOT for planning for the long-range transportation plan. So what we do is when we're looking at project prioritization and working with the department in the past, we've determined what percentage of each type of funding should be allocated towards maintenance versus what percentage of funding or what the amount of funding is that would be available that can be allocated towards new projects or project improvements. So what you see is using the same assumptions that we used in our prior plan, we compared the current plan update, which the values are shown in blue, with the previous plan, which values are shown in red. And what I've got is the beginning years of the plan, which is the TIP plus 2 years, then the next 6 years of the plan, and then the final years of the plan. And so these are kind of allocated across those year distributions. So one of the things that we're seeing happening with the current funding guidance is that a higher percentage of the NHPP funding is being allocated towards supportive projects on the interstate system. So what we see is the NHPP funding over time is kind of dropping down in order to allocate more money to the interstate system. So you can see that there is a funding reduction in the beginning years of the plan and the NHPP. The HSIP funding is very similar to the prior plan. We've got a significant loss in the loss of CMAQ funding for the region. So the prior plan included CMAQ funding, and the current plan will not include any CMAQ funding, which is a substantial amount of funding that we were able to allocate towards project prioritization. There's a slight uptick in what we consider the general funding, which those are very flexible funding sources that we can use for a variety of different projects. But for a grand total in the beginning years of the plan, we've got nearly an $8 million reduction between this plan and the first 6 years of the last plan. So that's something that we'll need to keep in mind as we start to prioritize projects. When we take that forward to the middle 6 years of the plan, we continue to see a reduction in the NHPP funding. It's actually a little bit more dramatic because most of the funding by the middle 6 years of the plan has been reallocated to the interstate system. Once again, we don't have CMAQ funding, and the general funding remains about the same. So for the middle 6 years of the plan, we've got about an $11 million reduction between the prior plan and the current plan that we're evaluating. And when you take that out to the final 14 years of the plan, just to make sure we're using the same number of years between the prior plan and the current plan, what we end up with is overall about a $25 million reduction in those final 14 years. So when you add all those numbers up, the net reduction that we're showing is about a $44 million reduction over the life of the plan. It's about a 48% reduction in funding, and 37 million of that is actually due to the loss of CMAQ funding. And so this is a quick analysis. We'll refine that over time, but I thought it'd be worthwhile to present to the TAC, just so that you know when we actually, if this is where we actually end up from a funding perspective, there'll actually be a lot less projects in the fiscally constrained long-range transportation plan this time than there were last time. So it's just something to be aware of. So, funding projects through the TIP and through the long-range transportation planning process is going to become a lot more difficult. So the loss in funding is actually pretty significant when you lay it out. It's in the next few years, it's not as significant of a reduction, but when you lay it out over the life of the plan, it's actually a very significant one. And I think it's kind of a consistent message to what we heard from Courtney earlier, as far as the impacts in the immediate term, as far as what the TIP is looking like. Does anybody have any questions about the funding aspects of the plan?
Well, that is not a pretty picture. actually to PennDOT, is there any talk about returning any CMAQ funds to Erie? I know they were taken away. I'm not sure if it was because Erie County's air quality improved so much, or that the CMAQ funds became more restrictive. Is there any talk of maybe returning some of these funds to Erie in the future?
My understanding, and maybe if Kevin or Courtney know more, they can correct me, but that the county, for whatever reason, is no longer eligible for those funds. I have not heard anything about a change in that. I think that's based on the federal program, as I understand it.
Yeah, and I'd echo that too. I think I know the discussion happened in financial guidance, and that process started a couple cycles ago. And it was, again, it was a federal highway recommendation for consolidating a CMAQ, and a lot of it had to do with the air quality and conformity. So I don't know all the details 100%. I haven't been involved in financial guidance directly the past, number of cycles, but that was the reasoning for that happening. I think at the time that they had talked about that, though, there was the thought of, and again, I don't think there was anything directly, that happened with regards to formula, but the idea is that, with the loss of CMAQ, and I know Erie had gotten, again, as a little bit larger MPO and having gotten CMAQ funds in the past, I know it was again, I knew it would be a blow. And I guess when you look at it over a long range transportation plan, it certainly looks like a money, and certainly not to, again, it is a lot of money, whether you look at it over a short period of time or a long period of time. So certainly a concern. The only thing that I'll say is that hopefully some of these new funding recommendations and stuff coming on the federal side will help everybody, bring everybody up and help to make up for some of those losses. But it's a tough situation. I know we did the same thing down in the Pittsburgh region, and I know when we're looking in Shenango Valley too at long range plan, and it's tough. It's like when you look at these revenues and you're trying to look at your long range plan and trying to do projects, you don't want to see the funding go down. It's the wrong way to look at it. So again, hopefully something will happen on the federal side and we can adjust those projections and actually see an increase in funding over the period of years so that you can put more projects on the program.
Okay, so yeah, it'll be critical, when we get into project prioritization, and we'll just have to keep our eyes and ears open for any kind of change in funding. But for the time being, I mean, it's the reality of the plan. I think it's pretty consistent with what folks have been saying about a projected revenue shortfall. So I was a little surprised when I put everything together and added up the numbers, though, I have to admit. So next up, I think Lisa was going to talk through the final survey results.
Yes, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I realize we're short on time, but if there's something that you guys would like more information about, please ask questions. So we did a survey online through SurveyMonkey. It's open from April 26th to June 11th. We got 477 responses. You can see from this pie chart that a big chunk of the responses were from the 25 to 40 and 41 to 56. And then fewer, not very many from older retired folks, and not a whole lot of under the 18 to 24s. Go ahead, Scott. And most of the respondents were white, and most of them were general public. We asked who they were representing, if they were representing a particular agency or government or organization. So that's the responses that you're going to see here. Go ahead. We also asked people their home zip code, and this is what we got. And the yellow is where I was trying to group kind of to look at the in near the city of Erie and kind of the outer areas of the county. And because it's zip codes, I can't just use municipal boundaries. I had to go with the zip code boundaries. So the yellow is what that is the inside the yellow is kind of close to the city, inner suburbs, and then outside is what we considered the outer areas of the county. So most of the respondents were, I believe something like 2/3 were in or near the city. Go ahead. And we also asked people where they work or go to school, trying to get at how many people are kind of going back and forth between the different kind of zones. And not surprisingly, most of the people who are working or going to school are doing it in the city. And I believe there were 3 zip codes, 2 in downtown and that big dark blue one there along I-90 that account for, I believe, 3/4 of the people who are working or going to school are going to one of those 3 zip codes. So that's a pretty concentrated result right there. And we asked them 4 main questions. The first one was to rate their access to healthcare, fresh food, childcare, work or school, shopping, recreation, entertainment. And they were rating excellent, adequate, poor. So you can see that healthcare, interestingly, had the best responses as having the most excellent access. Work or school and fresh food are next, and the poorest, I believe, is entertainment. Also childcare. And access is kind of a tricky thing because access can depend on multiple factors. It can depend on how easy it is to get to the place based on your mode of transportation or the street condition or the bus schedule. And it can also depend on the availability of those places to begin with. If there aren't very many childcare centers, then that makes them harder to get to. So it's one part of what we want to look at when we're talking about transportation, but it admittedly involves multiple factors. Go ahead. The next question was about modes. Which mode is most important to you for each of the following types of trips? Same list of destinations, and asking about driving, bus, walking, and biking. And not surprisingly, driving takes the majority of the responses for most of the categories. Parks, green space, recreation is the one where you see more of the walking and biking. And healthcare, interestingly, is the highest for driving and the lowest for biking and walking. So that tells you something about the availability of those services. Go ahead. Next question was, what are your transportation priorities? And interstate highways, transit, bridges, traffic flow, freight, walking, bicycling, and road pavement. The highest of all the scores was road pavement. The most number of people rated that as very or moderately important. The lowest was freight, which is kind of interesting, since freight is what makes a lot of our systems work. Interstate highways and traffic flow and bridges were also all very important, as was walking. Go ahead. And then taking that question a little bit farther, we asked how much would you spend on a variety of kind of, I'm gonna go ahead, Scott, to the next slide. So we gave them the definitions of these descriptions: preservation, preserving existing assets, more lanes and new roads, ride more, drive less, bicycling, walking, technology, and economic support. So kind of different philosophies of spending and prioritization for spending. If you want to go back to the graph now, there we go. And for this particular question, we asked them to rank things. So they could not, as in the previous question, they could answer everything being very important if they wanted to. On this one, we asked them to rank those 6 priorities from 1 to 6. So they had to choose a number 1. And the preservation option had the most rank 1 or 2 responses, and technology had the fewest high-ranking responses. So that's interesting as well. And I believe this is the last slide we have for this, right, Scott?
Yes, does anybody have any questions about that? One thing to keep in mind about the public survey is that, I guess, you know, it's not a surprise that folks would rank freight the lowest from a transportation priority standpoint, because this wasn't like a business or industrial survey. It was a survey, you know, really geared towards the public. And so a lot of folks don't realize that when you order something from Amazon, it takes a whole lot of freight for that to appear magically on your doorstep. And so some of these, you know, some of these responses, you need to sort of take that with a grain of salt. You know, another thing kind of worth noting when you consider things from a sort of a national context is that, you know, it's unsurprising that people want to be able to drive to healthcare services, because there's difficulty with taking a bus to healthcare, for example, because, you know, your appointment is when it is. And so, you know, and the buses, you know, arrive on a, you know, oftentimes on a fixed headway. And so that's why, you know, an emphasis on, you know, healthcare, access to healthcare services via driving is usually higher than many of the other types of destinations. So some things to keep in mind, but overall we were very, you know, we thought that the level of response that we got for both the Wikimap and the survey was pretty high. And we were, you know, it was nice to see kind of the geographic spread of some of the comments and the needs around the county. And so what we'll do is we'll take the results of the survey and we'll work with the MPO on, you know, factoring any changes or any insights from the survey into changes in the prioritization scheme. We'll take the funding slides that I presented earlier, and we'll use that for the fiscal constraint portions of the plan. And then we'll use the first slides that Lisa showed about the Wikimap results as far as driving and determining any new projects that we would want to consider in the plan and put through the prioritization process. So, you know, we're well on the way as far as developing many aspects of the plan, and we look forward to presenting, you know, more of these results to you as the planning process continues.
Well, thank you. We appreciate the report. Any questions? Okay, Emily, if you want to move on.
All right, well, we are almost at noon now. So the only thing we had left on the agenda was the project newsletter. But I think unless anyone has any pressing questions, we probably should just leave this for the next meeting. If anyone has any questions specifically about the projects, you can reach out to PennDOT. The emails are all here at the end of the end of the report. And then the last thing is that TA set aside is the pre-applications are due on August 16th. So coming up right around the corner. That's what Brian mentioned earlier. It's for trails, sidewalks, and non-vehicular projects. All right, so we have 2 minutes left till noon. Does anyone have any other business to bring before the MPO before adjournment?
No other business. We'll look for a motion for adjournment.
Bill Coon, so moved.
Okay, do we have a second?
Brian McNulty, second.
Okay, and you will vote by acclamation of leaving. Anyone want to stay? Okay, we're done. Have a good summer day.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.